Hello again. So this video is definitely probably going to be my last video on this. Uh, my previous videos, if you haven't seen them, don't worry, you're not going to miss anything. If you have, don't worry, this is going to be a lot better. So it's going to be kind of a dialogue I'm going to have with myself, and I've finally gotten to the point where I I I can properly articulate how, like, the point I'm trying to make, okay? So, I'm going to begin with, so why didn't POE2 work exactly? That's a difficult question to answer. And so let's go through some, let's begin with issues POE1 had. So, first off, it was difficult for new players to start and learn. Content bloat through league crafting mechanics that were put in because before Chaos Orbs in PoE1, they just completely re-roll the affixes on a rare item. And so that led to new crafting mechanics through other leagues, and it would be spread out through the game. And so it was like, oh my goodness, I have to learn all these. And then meta crafting was an issue because, it was too complicated for a new player to learn. They would have to, there's like a step process you have to go through. And then there was unintuitive crafting tech, like items sell more at vendors. It's like, how am I supposed to know what that does other than sell higher at vendors? But whenever I looked it up, it apparently has something to do with implicit crafting through synthesis and, chaos orbs. So it's unintuitive for a new player to know and understand, oh, I use it for this. And then how damage calculations work increases like to physical. If I convert that physical to fire damage, that physical increase to that portion of the physical damage that I convert to fire applies to that converted fire damage. That's not intuitive. You think, oh, physical only affects physical, not fire. At least that was something I had to grasp whenever I was starting out. And then next, damage calculations allowed for damage increases from one type to affect that of a converted or extra type. Like I stated, what was kind of difficult for new players to understand, that also led to a lot of converted damage increase, or increases through converted damage. And then leech, as we understand, for anybody that's played PoE1, very complicated. Or it's kind of confusing, mainly because a lot of terminology is the same, and it's like 3 or 4 similar sounding things that mean completely different things and do a different thing, but it sounds very similar. Skills require players to stand still and use. It made combat clunky, and so in order to try to make combat feel more smooth, they had to let the player get more movement speed and cast and attack speed in order to make it feel smoother and allow combat to flow better. And then there were many types of blinks and dashes that they would have to take into consideration when balancing a lot of attacks and boss mechanics and stuff like that. So initial changes going into PoE2 simplify crafting and redefine each crafting currency. When I look at the currency, the changes that they made initially to currency, I say, that completely fixes the issues that arose from meta crafting. That's a replacement for meta crafting and a replacement for all those league crafting mechanics. Then simplify damage calculations to prevent increased damage to apply to converted an extra type, so it's more intuitively understood. Oh, physical, increase physical, even if it's like a extra physical like like damage converted to extra physical or damage converted to physical, it is now increased, affects physical, and there's no damage conversion order, where there's also special cases in PoE1 where if it had to be specifically stated on like an item, and it would change. It got kind of complicated, and there's exceptions in PoE1, but in PoE2, it's any direction, but it's a two-step process. Simple, simple, simple. And then they simplified leech calculations, and then skills have more motion in them, and use so the player can move while using them to allow for better flow in combat. Now, I'm going to go into something more speculative and something that I kind of feel from this game. And that's kind of the issue of me when it came to trying to articulate exactly what I'm feeling. It's very hard because you have to look, there's so many different potential angles you have to look at, like what perspective were they looking at different times to try to understand, so why were they thinking this? Why'd they come to this? Why did they go about it this way? So I believe there were two diverging ideas for how to proceed with the game's development after they had made those initial changes. The game feels like there's two forces opposing each other and do not cohere. So the direction that they went moving forward after that point was they wanted to make combat more intense and engaging and have the player do more active combat. So I'm going to begin by asking some design questions. Can the framework of PoE facilitate these changes? Let's look at some aspects of PoE and ask how they help create the end experience. How does the game draw the world on the screen, i.e. the perspective? Well, top down. What does this mean for gameplay? Movement and positioning within the space is crucial. A top-down view is mostly used for more tactical gameplay when the camera is drawn out more. But with that comes some drawbacks. It becomes difficult to present intensity and to make the player feel it. The perspective isn't close enough to make the player feel. It requires the camera to be closer to the ground in order for the player to feel anything that's happening. How do games overcome this? XCOM changes the perspective for action animations, whether it be the enemy or one of your player units. Sniper Elite, while it's not a top-down game, imagine in Sniper Elite, you just fire the sniper at an enemy, and the enemy just drops to the ground, and you're still in the scope perspective. That would be boring, right? But what Sniper Elite does is it has a camera follow the bullet, slow motion, and then when it gets closer to the enemy, it shows the enemy, shows their internals, and then in slow motion you watch as that bullet completely shatters that man's low-hanging fruit. How do other games show intensity? Dark Souls has the camera in third person and the player character centered. The camera set back enough just so you barely see the big giant beast behind you breathing down your neck as they lower the cleaver down onto you. Skate games, like the aptly named Skate, makes the camera move slowly closer to the skateboard, proportional to the speed, to emphasize the intensity of kinetic energy being displayed. How is the perspective implemented in PoE? Well, it's in this weird spot, if you think about it. It's in a between zone. It isn't far enough out to support tactical gameplay, but it isn't close enough to create intense gameplay. How can we prove this? Well, Enemies become aggroed once they come near the camera's border. So, it means that we cannot anticipate and thus prepare for an encounter actively. Hence, the perspective doesn't allow for tactical active combat. Tactical active combat requires greater breathing room to prepare, especially if the player is in an active control. Unlike an RTS game, RTS game, you control positioning of packs and target priority, but you're not actively, controlling that. You're not. Yeah, you're more in a commander seat. When emphasizing intensity, artists, photographers, cinematographers, and designers will move the perspective closer to the ground to bring the viewer closer to what is happening. For example, if you've ever seen a nature documentary where it's in a tropical rainforest and there's warring ant colonies, if they ever go to a top-down view and pan it out, it's to show scale. Then what they'll do is have a camera real low, close to the ground, and show you the brutality of it, the brutality of what is happening. Makes you feel the intensity, makes you interested, engaged. So, think of any action scene in a movie. Pick any action scene, and you'll see that sort of angle change, low angle, close shot, low angle. Think Alien. Alien, whenever you see, Alien, yeah, the close shots are to create, to not show you the whole alien at any time, but it's also intensity of what is happening, the brutality, to really give you that sense of fear, like you're in there with them as it's happening. So then, what does the perspective do in PoE? It supports only the combat that the player is actively engaging in. What does this mean? Well, you know how the players have been begging for target dummies in their hideouts. Funny thing, the reality is you've been fighting target dummies the whole time. These ones just happen to clap back. Combat serves merely to be a check the developer uses to make sure you are hitting stat milestones, all while making sure you are moving and positioning adequately for your build's attacks and defenses. This is the reason why the AI is not tactical and responsive to the player. Its job is not meant to make combat interesting. Then what is the focus? The RPG mechanics. More specifically, the tools the developer gives the player to engage within the combat. So if the developer gives you the tools, then what makes it engaging? Depth and nuance. On the surface, if the developer gives you the tools to engage in combat and that combat cannot be engaging, then there is nothing for the player to actually achieve or work towards beyond following the developer's instructions. The RPG mechanics are to be designed in such a way that makes the player think, test, tweak, and add their own flavor to a build. That is how to make it more engaging. Something I noticed looking at PoE streamers over time. They usually, in PoE1 when there's a league, they spend at least a week on a build, while they're burning through builds in PoE2 every 1 to 3 days. What does that tell us? Is that a lack of content? On the surface, you might make the mistake of concluding that. PoE1 has several years of content, PoE2 has not as much content. That is a fallacy. It is correlative, but it is not causal. That is if we are defining content as in league content. But the combat cannot work as the main focus. So if we are considering content as the RPG mechanics, we still do not reach a good conclusion. Because if we continually shove in more RPG mechanics, we end up falling into the same pitfall of POE1, and it will become bloated. So what does it tell us then? The way that the RPG mechanics are designed in this game does not facilitate depth. The idea of giving the player the ability to better combine skills is a wonderful idea. However, the way it is implemented is restrictive to build diversity. In order to take a skill, we have to read not only what it does, but the requirements to create the situation that makes it work effectively or work at all. Then, we have to look through every other skill and find out exactly what skill allows us to meet the requirement or use the skill. Then, we have to look through the support gems in a separate menu and go back and forth to see how we can bridge the gap. There is no real mix and match with this system. Why is that? Because the fundamental purpose of skill gems and support gems are being overwritten by these very specific interactions. Even if we keep the skill gems and support gems like this, they are not visually presented to the player well. The connections between skills and what was designed to be paired with what is not shown. The player has to read through the entire description of each skill to see how you intended for the player to use them. Then the player wants to see other options for support gems beyond what you recommend for the skill. They have to sift through a wall of poorly organized support gems. It's like looking through a filing cabinet without anything labeled beyond Tier 1, Tier 2, etc. But what about rejects? Well, rejects implies that I already know what mechanic I'm searching for. It doesn't allow for a player to see the options that you provide them as a whole. There is no reason to use the tier of the gem to organize them in the first place. Why? Because 1, if I don't have the correct tier of uncut gem, then it would be grayed out. 2, if I'm confused why it's grayed out, when I hover over the gem, it already tells me exactly why it's grayed out. Did something like this exist in POE1? And how can it be implemented to make the RPG mechanics facilitate more diversity? Well, POE1 had some gems and support gems, or some skill gems and support gems, that encouraged comboing of offensive skills, but they were very few. If you want to flesh this aspect out more, you need to make it a separate mechanic that is a specific place the player knows to look at for this skill comboing. You need to also present it in a way that is more organized and allows the player to traverse it more freely. How to begin going about this? Well, how do we make this system more modular? Let's begin with trying to detach it from skills. What else is there that is more fundamental than this? Ailments, status effects, etc. Rather than baking it into skill and support gems, it should be a fundamental interaction of ailments and status effects. How should this be displayed to the player? Well, let's see if there exists a format within the game that allows for players to more freely look at all the options provided to them. Where is that? The passive tree. If we look how the passive tree is presented, it is a branching chart that the player can freely drag around on their screen. to view their options. This would provide a better view for the player since they will be able to zoom in and out and will allow for better organization by grouping the different combos around in a circular manner. How would you introduce the player to this? Well, ideally, it may be good to allow the player access to this from the beginning. Now, hear me out. My theory for this is as follows. You want the player to combo skills, but I feel the best way to do this is to make skills function on their own at a fundamental level, and then support gems will accent those skills in different ways, like POE1. Then the comboing tree will facilitate the comboing. So let's say we're a new player. We're starting out and get our first skill. We still have to get used to the game and its mechanics. We see this combo tree and we get a little overwhelmed, but we are not forced to use it. Just something that lets the player know something like this is there. Now, let's say we complete acts. We've gotten more comfortable with the mechanics and with skills, but we want a little more. We remember the combo tree, and then, bam, the player looks at the tree and the mechanics. The mechanic of the tree is better solidified in their mind since they were introduced to it earlier, and it was more suggested to them slightly at the beginning rather than forced, so you don't overwhelm them by just picking it up and then tossing it to them. It's more like, hey man, this thing, it's here anytime you want it. Not only that, but the next time the player plays the next league, or start a new character, they'll know it's there and go to it since they already understand the game better. And then this also adds a element of something for seasoned players that already know the game to engage in right off the bat. And of course, this is me just spitballing stuff. It can have its drawbacks. It's not exactly a foolproof idea, but it's, ideas like this, taking into consideration new player experience and helping the new player try to understand things that exist, not trying to add too many different things for the player, but have some things that are next to each other that are simple enough as they are, only as complex as they need to be, and have those combined together to create a more nuanced experience to allow for a greater amount of expression from the player in the world. Now, I'm going to pivot a little over to some things that I kind of worry about. One, the way that currency currently is, the fact that you have like Alteration Orb 1, Alteration Orb 2, Alteration Orb 3, and the same thing for a lot of other currencies. I do not like that idea. I think that's not a good idea going forward for the game, because think about it. Who is going to have most of these higher currencies that can get better modifiers? People closer to endgame. So you give people closer to endgame easier way to get to endgame, and it's like, like I play SSF and I don't like this idea. I think it just adds too much than is needed. I just think I don't think it's good for the game, because think about it. If someone uses that currency and then it rolls bad, how do you think that's going to feel for them? You rather have one currency that just rolls. And the issue isn't the fact that, this doesn't solve the issue of progression when it comes to trying to smoothen progression. This doesn't actually fix that, because players that are trying to transition to maps, they're not going to have any of those higher ones. They're just not going to have the ones that allow them to roll better, so they can actually get at least a mid-range affix. Or, yeah, affix. I was getting confused between suffix and prefix. And then affix, is similar sounding words, but I was mistaken. Anyways, the important thing is, like, a basic crafting bench closer to maps with mid-tier affixes is not problematic. I have played SSF for I don't know how long. I have, 5,500 hours in POE1 and 2,500 hours in POE2. I can tell you without any doubt in my mind that Path of Exile needs some form, Path 2 needs some form of crafting bench that allows the player to, at least at maps, get a mid-range affix, a single one. And I think what you're thinking of by not putting in a crafting bench and by having the player solely rely on the crafting currency is you don't want deterministic crafting. And I think a lot of the changes you made, you looked at endgame in Path 1 and you said, let's look at endgame on the surface and then say, how do we create that experience across the entire game? That is one potential perspective that I guessed you might have looked at this. The issue with that is, as I have stated in my previous diatribe or dialogue, whichever one you I can't remember what diatribe means, whatever. Anyways, the point is, there is so much underneath the surface about endgame content in PoE1, because what's playing out in front of you isn't what it seems. What it is the absolute pinnacle a build can get to. Once you make a environment like that your base game, you then have to completely cut off everything at the bottom. You have to make sure that the player is able to have the proper stats at that specific time that they need to be. That's what a more combat-oriented game does. Think of Halo. They only give you a set of parameters. Normal, you have the same set of parameters, same weapon spots, same grenade spots, same stuff. I mean, maybe the enemies somewhat change. The enemy AI definitely changes as you go up in difficulty, but the relative parameters are the same. It's just the enemy then becomes the difficulty. And then you have to engage with it differently, engage in it more tactically. But the point is they give you the parameters on each level to produce and make sure you have a specific experience that you can engage in and that they have designed to be engageable in. Once you shift over closer to more action, you have to make sure the player can actually engage in action. That is the issue when it comes to actually relying heavily on action in an RPG game, is the RPG mechanics then have to take a back seat. And that's why it's very difficult to get interested in this game, because the RPG mechanics that you usually expect from a Path of Exile just aren't there. It's more cookie cutter. And the passive tree as well it's somewhat like that. Like the passive tree, you have us being able to sort of multi-class in a way, like having spells that we can swap to, like a staff, and then swap between staff and melee and whatnot. But the issue is the way that the passive tree is actually oriented. I find, like, whenever I tried to do it, it was more like there was dead branches anytime I would swap. And so it seemed so much more inefficient for me to even bother with that. I would be giving up way too much power to do that. Why not just be simple? And that's another issue I find with comboing. It's like, it's so much more easier just to be simple. You know, the the nuance in Path 1 is not from being convoluted. It's simplicity within the mechanics and understanding the rules. Understanding the rules is so important, and that then comes in and gives greater nuance because the player understands the rules that the game has set forth, and they are simple to understand once you understand them, and they're solid. Except for some caveats. I won't. You know what? Moving on. Anyways, what I worry of is also the way that support gems are. Like, just go to where, like, you have recommended and then show all support gems that could go with that skill. Like, just look at that. It's completely messy. And even if you organize it better, I still worry about it because it's going to be so many support gems. I'm not looking at right now. Right now, it's kind of messy, but it's the player can kind of overcome it. I just get dizzy because it's like looking at a textbook, flipping back and forth through the pages. My head starts spinning, and the room starts spinning. I just can't do that. Anyways, the point is I feel like it's very important to take that comboing out of the support gems, because the way it is now, it's going to overcomplicate things, and it's going to make it so much worse the later this goes on and the more this goes further. And that's kind of why I also worry whenever you do these legacy support gems, because it doesn't actually, it tries to keep things interesting and add diversity, but it doesn't fix the issue of why this game has that issue, And I worry. That's the main reason I make these videos, is in reality I'm just worried about this game, because I feel like it has completely forgotten the initial changes that it has made going from Path 1 to Path 2. Those very fundamental changes. I look at those, and those things are so powerful. If you really think about it, it solves every single issue Path 1 had. And in trying to pivot towards this action-oriented way, is in doing so, you kind of got rid of those fundamental changes. Like, it just feels more like, here's the thing. The damage changes. The fundamental reason that I see the importance of those is they're so simplified to the point where you can now provide so many more options to the player that you couldn't before, because of having to worry about how damage conversion and stuff worked in POE1. In POE2, you could do so much more, but it feels like you didn't utilize it properly. I mean, there's some areas you utilized it, but you didn't utilize it enough. Like, look at Acolyte Chaiula. Acolyte Chaiula's damage is all hidden behind extra, like, damage as extra chaos. But if you actually do the math, it feels almost like it completely forgets the fact that those damage changes were made. Like, Monk doesn't have any ability to do base chaos damage as a monk. So we do non-chaos damage, right? Even though we have nodes completely dedicated to chaos damage, like leech and whatnot. And so we have to deal with, okay, I deal no damage, and then I deal some damage with the chaos, and then, oh, I deal most of my damage is base, and then the chaos damage is like just there, I guess. It's like minuscule comparatively, and it's better off just ignoring completely. Like, I find it way easier to just ignore all the nodes on Acolyte Chayula. Just completely ignore it. And I see the issue of, also, you've kept trying to make darkness more enticing. Darkness as a mechanic currently is just not good. The way it's implemented, what it does is just not good. You make people give up spirit, for one. Two, you give them an absurd amount of EHP for absolutely no reason. Like, it is an absurd amount of EHP if you think about it. And it needs to be completely reworked. And the funny thing is you've tried so hard to make Acolyte Chayula make sense. It never did, and it still kind of doesn't. The only way it makes sense is if you off-class it with fire spells now. Take that keystone. And again, with leech, also then, you've then made it, you've overcomplicated it to the point where, oh, only physical attacks can leech. But the thing is there's, for something like a monk, the whole thing about a monk is continually fighting. You know, keeping that momentum in fighting. Keeping that momentum, attacking, keeping up the pressure, like getting through the front line and the tanks to get to the back line, because the back line's gonna fire a volley of projectiles at you and kill you, so you go there, and you've made the solution to that in the fact that, oh, there's a volley of projectiles constantly at you. You've used rolling and making rolling more spammable in the process, too. I'm digressing, but when it comes to leech, like, I have to pick a keystone. So let's look at Acolyte Chayula. Oh, my chaos damage can now leech. What chaos damage? Oh, the extra. Oh, the extra that does nothing. And I did the math, and I showed it in one of my previous videos. The math just doesn't add up, period. All this extra damage doesn't do anything. Even if you take the maximum amount of increase and the maximum amount of extra on the tree, you still come out losing. It's not good. I'm sorry, it just isn't the way it is. And all you had to do was either give Monk a way to convert all that damage to chaos, or just give a main skill gem that does base chaos damage. That's it. I mean, the only source of chaos damage we can get on a weapon at a base level is, well, on a martial weapon, is to either do a corrupted implicit or a rune implicit. That's it, you know? Gosh, I'm about to get all over in this video. Shoot. Because I'm now remembering some things I've forgotten. So, back to the crafting. Like, look, the crafting, you need some crafting bench just that gives mid-range modifiers. A single affix. A single one. And I think you're mistaken when it comes to, oh, endgame crafting. That's what I was trying to get by endgame. You were thinking endgame crafting. And trying to make that, oh, every crafting step. The issue with that is endgame crafting because look at endgame crafting statistics. Those are very bad statistics to rely on for progression. And that's what I was trying to get at with this extra currency. No one during progression is going to be able to have those. And then, oh, I just wasted this rare currency and I didn't even get what I needed. I didn't even get a good modifier. And the rune socket implicits are not enough of a resistance to bridge the gap in gear. Because gear, think about the amount of statistics we have to go through in order to get all the modifiers we need at a proper value. Not only that, but every single piece of gear needs to be able to click. You can't have it lopsided. I have had it so many times where my gear just rolls completely lopsided whenever I put them together, and I can't find anything to balance it out properly because I use an exalted orb and it doesn't roll the right modifier. I engage with these systems, but the systems just fall apart so many times. It's like, this is simpler than it has to be. You don't have to add these new currencies. All you need, basic crafting bench. If you're worried about, what about the tech whenever a player can block a modifier and then blah, 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 blah. Look, there are simple solutions to that. You can prevent a player from using crafting currency on an item when they put a crafting modifier on it. Or two, what you can do is you can just have the item remove the crafting modifier anytime a player tries to put a crafting currency, use it on it. So you remove the modifier before you apply the actual currency in, like, code-wise. And that, it's just stuff like that. It doesn't have to be as complicated. Some of these systems are kind of flawed. Just continually using these systems that just don't click and just overcomplicating them isn't really going to fix things. It's just going to make it kind of worse. And just add more complication than needs to be. Whenever I was playing, like, tier 2 items would drop and tier 3 items, and I pick them up and I reveal them, and the modifiers either it's like good but it's nothing I can use, or it's just like completely terrible modifier, and I'm like, what's the point of tier 2 and tier 3 exactly? Like, it's confusing. It's just confusing because it's like, what? So it's supposedly, but it supposedly rolls better. I don't see that. It's confusing to a player. If you say, oh, it's supposed to roll better, and then I don't see that, and I'm like, and this is supposed to help with progression. But you have a ton of different base items. Like, think about how many base items you have to drop. And think about how they have to then align to my build and my archetype. And you begin to see why something like this just isn't good to bridge the gap of progression and smoothen it out. You need some sort of stable ground, because let's recall, we have resistance, what's it called? What's the word I'm looking for? Penalties. We have penalties the closer we get to maps as we go further into acts. If you have those penalties, you then need to at least do something to give the player agency to be able to actually overcome those and actually get to resistance cap if they utilize the systems properly and be able to engage in content. We're having too many stops. And that's the thing, is endgame crafting is endgame crafting because we are min-maxing. We are min-maxing, and that's why it feels good whenever we finally hit that. You can't mimic that. at any other point in progression. You just can't. It doesn't work like that. Because if I have to do that at every step of progression, it becomes less, oh, sweet, nice, and more of, oh my god, I gotta do this again. And you have to smoothen that. And then, next on the docket, a leech. So, real quick, why is leech, like, anytime I want to leech other than physical, I have to go into either a keystone or I have to go into an ascendancy? Why? Why not just attacks? Spell leech, yeah, it's fine. We're not talking about that. They have arcane search. They have a ton of regen. That's fine. I've seen forums, people, anytime we talk about, only physical attacks leeching, people start bringing up, they said they don't want energy shield leech, and they don't want spell leech. No, we're not talking about that. We're talking about life leech. We're talking about mana leech. As a monk, real quick, I want you to think. Invoker. So we have Invoker, right? What does Invoker do? Invoker does elemental attacks. Okay. Cool. Real quick. What does it do? Physical? No. I mean, it could, but that's not its ascendancy. God. Okay, those elemental attacks. How do we leech with those elemental attacks? Because we're a monk, we need to keep up momentum in combat, and we need to sustain our abilities, which becomes ever increasingly harder later on. So what do? We have to take a keystone in order to leech mana with elemental damage. Huh. Do you understand how redundant that is? Why, if that keystone becomes necessary in order for a specific class to function at all, what is the point? Like, I think you set up all these rules for the designers to follow, and then they have to work around those hard set rules that they can't just make things practical. Why aren't we making this practical? Why can't attack leech just be attack leech? Why does it have to be through physical, and then, if I want to do anything else, I have to do through some special means? It's ridiculous. I don't get it. It's silly. Like, also, you know how ridiculous this is? Look at Acolyte of Chayula. Oh, my chaos damage can leech. What chaos attack damage? Oh, the extra damage. Oh, the extra damage that doesn't scale properly because damage increases don't work like they do in POE1. And even if I take all the increases in the world, it like the chaos increases, it doesn't actually equate to any gains. Yeah. Oh, so it's a dead node, huh? It's silly. Like, come on. And I get, like, there's stuff being worked on in the background. That's fine. It's just, I've been waiting for stuff since day one to be fixed. Like, and to actually, like, finally, for once, make sense. I'm the person that tried to make Acolyte of Chayula make sense as a monk day one. Do you have any idea how impossible that is? It was funny. Yeah, I figured out very quickly Acolyte of Chayula didn't do anything, and it was just you can ignore it. You could just ignore it, and then you'll be fine. Just go poison, or go power charge consumption with lightning fall. It works itself. And that's it's so efficient to just spec into power charges. It's ridiculous. And then lightning too. And it's just like, easy. I don't even have to sustain anything, because I attack slow enough for it to just not matter. And then So we get to, let's see, leech, Okay, melee combat. I appreciate you finally working on melee skills and improving them. Here's the issue, though. I think the issue goes more, it's more fundamental than you think. So, there was one or two changes that specifically hurt melee and have hurt melee since you implemented them. That is the swarming. Real quick, let's hear image, right? Image of, here's the pack, here's the player. Okay, let's think. Where do melee players tend to stand in order to do anything? Right next to the enemy. Oh, yes. How quick is the player compared to the enemy? The player is pretty slow compared to the enemy. Yes. Okay. So, where does a non-melee player usually stand? Away from the pack? Yes, away from the pack. Good. Okay. And so, real quick, how is melee supposed to function? Like this clearly, unequivocally, is a change that only affects melee. I have never, ever had this aspect affect me in any way in a non-melee build. Ever. I do not know why you continue to have it. Look, I get it, work was done on it, time was spent on it, but you made that mechanic under the false conclusion that you could add intensity. So if it's part of an argument that has a false conclusion, would you not say that's invalid? An invalid argument. God. So, continuing, I think that the main issue of melee and why it's so flippin' clunky and why it's so impossible is because you have this where all the enemies are faster than the player and they're like a concrete wall. And they just treat the player like a pinball machine. Or a pinball in a pinball machine. You know, those 3 bumpers that you farm points off of. Ding, 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 ding. And then, yeah, that's, yeah, I just think something like that. And it goes down to that original thing is not getting to the root of the issue and just kind of skirting around it. And, you know, again, I don't know what's happening in the background, you know, in the studio, but I'm just pointing that out. You know, that I feel is like one of the biggest changes that really hurt melee. And not only that, I think the collision boxes need kind of slimmed up. If you look at the collision boxes between POE2 and POE1, POE1, the collision boxes are really tight to the model, the 3-dimensional model of the enemy. And in this game, they're like it's like a force field around them. And if we go back to what I was saying about what is important about top-down games, movement within the space, the ability for the player to move within the space adequately and be able to do so effectively, and the positioning that the player is in. If the player cannot adequately move through the space with the position that is required for it to function, i.e. melee being next to the enemy, and not being able to move because of the fact that they get overwhelmed, but they're supposed to be next to the enemy and they have a wind up on everything, and etc., on and on. It's just, it breaks the entire experience. And that's one issue. Next, what's next on Again, I'm just worried. I'm just worried that this game will run into the same pitfalls PoE1 did. And I don't want that to happen, you know. I would like, you know, stuff to be learned from those experiences. And again, if you were looking to make Endgame more like, oh, we want to open up Endgame to more people, so why don't we make the entire game Endgame? That the issue with that is the fact that the way that Endgame presents itself in PoE1 isn't exactly just surface level as it seems. Like, oh, all this crazy enemies just pouring in. Maven pops out of nowhere. You know, like in tier 17s and Valdo's boxes, all that. That comes out of the fact that the player has used the RPG mechanics and used them so efficiently and has squeezed the most out of them. And not every build, not every skill can even engage with that. Not every player can engage with that, but that's fine. There's enough for the player to actually still engage in. Here, like, I think players, they look at, oh, the extremes. They look at other people and how they're playing. I would advise against that as a player. Just enjoy yourself, enjoy what you're doing, enjoy what's in front of you, and do your own thing. Don't look at other people. Don't look at the fact that someone's already gotten to maps like within what, 4 hours. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't. They just do their thing. Whatever. That's all I got to say on that. What else? I'm drifting off. Oh no. Uh, hmm. Hmm. Mind has gone blank. Yeah. Uh, yeah, that's about it for this video, really. I just wanted to talk about things I'm worried about, try to go into detail about my thought process on what I think is wrong. And again, uh, back, gosh, I keep digressing and then forgetting what train of thought I was on. Oh no, it's setting in early. Oh. Anyways, so back to the discussion of PoE1 Endgame. Endgame is not on what it seems on the surface. You can't bring up that just what was on the surface and just bring it up without fundamentally changing everything underneath that propped up. It's like there's so much underneath the surface of what's happening in PoE1 Endgame than is apparent on visually. You know, yes, the player's getting overwhelmed, but that's because they have the numbers in their build to completely overcome all that. That is it. It's not necessarily combat prowess, it's prowess of mastering the RPG mechanics and mastering all the mechanics the game has. And then having all those come together to overcome this absolutely insane, crazy kerfuffle that's happening in front of them, you know? And I just keep seeing a sort of concerning trend continually with a lot of these patches. It seems almost like they feel like they're under restrictions to the point where they can't just make things practical or feel like they can't make things practical. Can we just go back to just having things be somewhat practical? Like, what is the reason for only physical attacks to leech? I know the reason for spells not having to leech, but if the reason is oh, we need to give ascendancies something special. To that point, if you feel the need to make, in order to make a ascendancy unique, you have to do that. That begs the question if it is even necessary to have this many ascendancies in the first place, if this is how you're going to go about it. And you can make an ascendancy unique by being creative and not locking agency behind that. That, I think, is just a flawed philosophy. It should allow you to do interesting things and have some interesting aspects, but the way that it's being done, it's so hard to look at things like Acolyte Chaiula and be inspired on what to do with it. There's not much agency it provides. There's nothing practical really about it beyond some arbitrary you say so. And that's, I'm a person that has the sickness known as engineering. When I look at something impractical, and your reasoning is because I say so, I go, why should I even bother at that point? Look, the whole beauty of PoE was understanding the mechanics and being able to explore after you understand them. And PoE1 got so bloated with crafting because there were things that the game didn't tell you as a new player, because in order to know that it was there, we would have had to be there for previous leagues. And that's the issue I see with you just adding more crafting to the core game from league mechanics. Like, league mechanics should provide something interesting, but it shouldn't be crafting. Like, for the league, yeah, it can give crafting, but it shouldn't go core. The core game should be able to solve its own issues, not through league mechanics. It should be just a practical thing that's there. And I feel relying on currency is not good. And another thing, attack speed and movement speed modifiers. Those things are an issue because gear is so precious that if we don't have attack speed, because those base values we don't get on the tree, right? So those things are so, like, in order to progress at all, you need that. But the thing is now you're running into the issue where, okay, so people need attack speed now in order to have the game feel smooth and have combat feel smooth and work. That's the issue with PoE1. So why don't we just design things to feel good, have combat feel good on its own, and not heavily rely on attack speed to carry that? And design combat around, oh, we expect the player to have attack speed and movement speed. Because then you run into the issue that is presented. I've just stated, we need to make, or things need to be more practical. Like, please, just practical. It just also be like, here's the thing. You can add all these new shiny keys jingling in my face. I don't get excited for it. The reason is I know, oh, I can't explore it that well. Because there's just so much reading through support gems I have to do. Reading through the skill gems. And then finding out how I can even facilitate it in a practical way. This is the issue with having combos just built into it. I get time needs to happen, but Like, uh, just let's make things practical and make practical changes. Please. I look at everything, I'm like, why is it not practical, please? Like, physical, only physical attacks can leech. To me, that's like, there's no reason. And to me, that's like you saying, dance, monkey, dance. I can dance. I can take you telling me to dance for a while, but if you keep telling me to dance just because you want me to dance, I start saying, no, you're not giving me a good reason to dance. And if anything, it's just because you arbitrarily deem it so. You don't give a good reason. I feel like so much of what made PoE1 so good and so just infinitely playable for people is, I feel like a lot of that has just been forgotten, or just completely missed the point. The beauty in Path of Exile is exploring the systems after you learn it. That is the beauty. And I, a player that has gone through that in PoE1 and has gone through, like, finally starting to try to learn the game late Expedition League, and then Calandra Leagues when it finally, everything kind of clicked. I still didn't have a ton of metacrafting understanding, but still, I still, I had enough to where, come Crucible League, I made my own build, and I defeated Maven for the first time, and I defeated Uber Elder for the first time. And I felt good about that. The most beautiful thing that Path 1 did was to trick the player into thinking they were the architects of their victory. That it was them the whole time, that they overcame this sort of giant insurmountable thing. But still, you, the developer, created that experience, created that environment to which the player could achieve that. And that's the most beautiful trick Path of Exile could ever pull on someone. On, like, any RPG system can ever trick someone that is into thinking they were the architects of their victory. That is a very difficult thing to do, but it is one of the most beautiful things. And I feel the way that this is designed is in such a way that exploring the RPG mechanics, even though everything has been simplified, exploring them becomes such a hassle. It's no longer the curve is understanding it. It's just even exploring it now is the mountain you have to climb, and you have to just read so much skill gems, support gems, and it's just dizzying. And do I think I'm right? Do I think what I say is right and that's why I'm saying it? No. I say this, and I'm making this because I'm trying to give my perspective, my experience with Path of Exile, and trying to articulate that, trying to take all of that experience and the feelings I've had for Path of Exile, and trying to articulate why exactly this just doesn't click for me. And it's not that it's necessarily bad. It's just, there are times where the game just tells me, dance, monkey, dance. And I'm like, why? There needs to be better cohesion. There needs to be better just simplicity and practicality in this. And I've tried to articulate to the best of my ability and to try to talk what exactly is like doing action and focusing on that in a top-down game is not playing to the strengths. You know, you need to play to the strengths. You need to remember what takes focus with the perspective that you have. The perspective you have does not really facilitate active combat. Yeah, like bullet hells, yes. But again, that goes back to movement and positioning within the space, also with bullet hells. Like, think about a bullet hell. It's a bullet hell, right? You move and you position. That's the difficulty, and that's what takes precedence, is having the player be able to move and position within the space adequately for what you're demanding them to do. And that's the thing about trying to make action in this better, is to just make it flow better for each individual class at a base level. Like, we shouldn't be looking to stats to improve flow. We should be looking at stats for power. Like, the main challenge shouldn't be overcoming clunkiness, you know? The game should flow better on a fundamental level. And that's the issue whenever you want to focus more on action in order to actually have action play out. You need a base level that the player can actually function on. And whenever you have a item system where all your base values are no longer in the passive tree, they're only in items, so you can't have that baseline to actually work off of, you then take away the fact that, the player, you now still expect the player to have attack speed at some point. You know, not at the very end when they min-max, but at a point whenever they're transitioning to maps, they're expected to have attack speed, but they have no real agency over that. Think about the amount of statistics that an item has to go through in order to roll to actually meet minimum requirements that you expect of the player. Think about that. But just please improve flow of combat. That's all you really have to do to make combat more engaging. Here's the ultimate thing about Path of Exile. The sticking power is, after you have understood the systems, now comes the beauty of the expression and the exploration and discovering things and just creating new things and doing your own thing. That is the beauty. To trick yourself, the player, into thinking that you are the architect of your victory. And just the game, after you have gotten over the hump of understanding the mechanics, the game doesn't necessarily restrict you fully. You understand the mechanics, and it gives you the agency and the ability to eventually chip away at the imperfections and to incrementally just eventually get to that point where you can just fight Maven, you can fight Uber Elder, and you can defeat them for once, and you get their drops, and you're like, oh wow, let me do that again, let me farm this up again, let me keep doing this, let me see how much further I can go, how I can refine things better, how I can do this and that. And the game doesn't say, like, in order to get to that point where you can farm, it doesn't say, or at least farm at a basic level like in maps, and to progress through maps at a fundamental, like, no map modifier level. It doesn't tell you to bash your head against this item till it rolls good, or You know, that is what I'm trying to get at. There just needs to be better practicality, better cohesion. And I want newer players to not have to go through what I had to go through in trying to eh, understand things that you don't even know exist, essentially, in order to enjoy the game. And yeah, that's that's about it. Uh, it is. I just feel more perspectives. You know, it's like the law of what's it called? It's like a law in psychology where it's essentially uh or it's the rule of the group or something, or the many, or the population. It's whenever you take an independent uh response, like it's the experiment was like essentially counting jelly beans in a jar. You ask a person singularly, one person without anybody else to influence their decision, give their perspective, give how much they think is in the jar, and you do that for thousands of people. In the end, the average winds up being the actual amount that is in the jar. And that is the thing, is trying to get all perspectives as possible and see where they all intersect so we can then come to a more sound and more perfect solution. That is, I'm just trying to provide my perspective. That's it. If it's right, if it's wrong, who knows? I've tried to articulate it and build up the argument as to why I think that as best as I can, but yeah, who knows? I could be crazy. There's always that possibility. I'm never afraid of uh, never afraid of denying that possibility. Who knows? Our perception of the world is purely through our own mind, and who knows if that's flawed or not. Anyways, uh that's it. Bye.